and so he's here to talk to you guys today. All right.
You know, you okay? Yeah. I brought my longboard too. Hey, thanks for letting me join you all. How about having a rock star professor? Let's hear for Dr. Roulette. He kind of show off. Free something for somebody else to earn. Hey, so I started the last class with, I want to start with the same question. Why do you have to take, like, why is this class required? Of all classes, no matter what year you are in school right now, you have to have this class to graduate. Why? Got a microphone over here. We're going to begin shaming people and he's calling for answers. Why is this class required?
Make us better citizens.
Make us better citizens? Like that. Yeah. Pretty good answer. Anything else? One right here.
It's just one of the basic fundamental parts of our government.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are two great answers. Somebody has something else they want to add, fantastic. When you think about what can be done for a populace, when you think about what can be done for people in a state or a country, to me, it really starts off, there are kind of three fundamental things. And I'm not going to quiz you on those. Professor might later, but I'm not. That's the good part about not having a class myself. I've taught since '97. When you come in and give a guest lecture, there's no responsibility. Right? You just give maybe a repeated lecture and walk away, and there's no obligation. But there are only three things that you can do to help out people as a government. And it really is provide for healthcare. Right? One of those three. The second is the ability to provide economic opportunity. The third is an education. Those are kind of, for me, three fundamental things that a government can do. And when you think about this question of why does this class matter? Why does it matter if we're a good citizen or not? I mean, is it, like, why is that important? I'm not looking at the TA group, you all know everything. You know, why is it important to be a good citizen? And then let's also think about what it means, like why does the state and federal government, why do they support students going to college, although less than they used to? But why would a government do this? And so a government supports education and higher education. Again, three reasons. Everyone loves threes. So it really is because they want individuals to flourish. Like they want you, especially in an increasingly knowledge-based system, to flourish, and that's important. And they also want the state level for you to do things that are productive and help the state's economic opportunities increase. Those are two reasons. And a third reason is that we invest from the government in education because the comment was made, we want people to be informed citizens. So why is that a thing? Well, why does it matter to have it? We've got a constitution. We've got all these rules. Some call them laws. Seem technical to me. But why does it matter if we are informed citizens or not? Like, who cares?
I think it is because the decision belongs to us, so we need to be informed to make right decisions.
Yeah.
Because of democracy, basically.
Because of democracy. What's that? Same thing. I love that. You just said, you got to speak and the answer was the exact same thing. That's how I approach it. I like that. I get the long board at the end of, you're like, I participated. Right. I said, I agree. Yeah, so this idea of, so what's the oldest continuing democracy in the world? Who has it? What country? U.S. That's a good answer. Are we a very old country? So how does that work? You're young, still relatively young. That's how I describe myself. I'm relatively young, relative to like someone in their 80s. But we're a relatively young country, but we're the oldest continuing democracy. So the idea is that democracies aren't certain. Just by show of hands, how many think that there is a risk that America is not a democracy in the next 25 years? Show of hands. Wow, that's kind of powerful, right? So when I went to school, I just sort of thought democracies lasted forever. And they don't. And when I was in school here at OU, to me, what the destruction of the democracy looked like was like tanks rolling in and taking it over. And then the next day, some military leaders took it over and it was no longer democracy. But what we've seen over the last couple of decades is a huge shift in that. And so why this class matters is that we have to have individuals within our population of citizens that know how government works. And I was talking to the previous class, we talked about a stat about 3 or 4 years ago. I was asked to give a speech on Law Day. I'm sad you missed that speech. You know what? They get a compressed version of that. So there. But the question was, at the root of it, it was talking about how do democracies continue themselves. When I started looking at it, I came across the Ben Annenberg survey, and it was it indicated the percent of voting age Americans that could name all 3 branches of government. What percent do you think that was? What percent of voting age Americans in that particular survey time, it's done every 5 years, could name all 3 branches of government? 30%? Yeah, 16%. And it was down like almost 20% from 5 years before that. And it's a credible survey group. And there are a lot of data points out there right now about this, but if only such a small fraction of people can name all 3 branches of government, how do you keep that form of government moving forward? Right? Because our Constitution, there are a bunch of them that are written better than ours, that have fallen completely apart. Right? I mean, because they're not self-executing. Right? Like, just because you say it's a democracy doesn't mean it's a democracy. Just because you have a constitution doesn't mean it's a democracy. Now, I think in class you all were talking about demagogues, right? And the idea of autocrats, right? Individuals that consolidate power. When you look across the country right now, and you're professors and expert in this, and you look at other countries right now in the world where they have been a democracy, but they're moving towards no longer being a democracy. Right? Moving towards an autocrat taking over. It's really important to know how that happens and what that playbook is. And so that's kind of the goal over the next few minutes, to talk about us thinking about why does this class matter? And not just you're going to become, the next great history or political science, professor. But if you're in the fine arts, right? Regardless of your major, why does this class matter? And the answer is because the one thing everyone in this class has in common is you're in the minority of Americans that will graduate with a college degree. And that means that whatever you choose to do, people around you are going to look to you as an authority. Whether you like it or not, right? You go to a comprehensive research university and you're an authority. And people look to you no matter what direction you choose for your life. And so this is part of the investment that's made by governments in education is there's an expectation that we learn and we lead. And that's sort of the great irony of all things, which is Right? The more you're given, the more you have to give back. It's just how it works, even if you don't want to. I was really selfish as an undergrad. And I can recall looking at certain things and thinking, why would people volunteer their time? Well, it turns out that there's two big tricks, which is the actual only thing that matters in terms of happiness is helping other people, unless you have enough to feed yourself and otherwise. But also with every opportunity you get, there's a corresponding obligation. Ours is citizenship. And it's also super selfish because it's really tricky to do what you want to do unless you yourself are wanting to be an autocrat. It's hard to accomplish the goals and dreams we have for our professions and our lives if we're not in a democracy. So this is all of ours. And if it's a one required class that everyone in this room has to have, what it should be, because this is our obligation. Now, what do we have to look out for? We have to, first of all, I think, be really honest that when you look at and you read about government and the role of government, and in our country, the three branches of government, that our eyes are wide open. And that it's not, that what we do is not preordained to result in democracy or to result in right answers. And to me, you've got to be honest about this, right? What is our American history, right? You can look at elements of it: internment of Japanese, enslavement of Africans, right? You look at Plessy versus Ferguson. You look at Pickett. But running a democracy and propagating it isn't easy. It requires a lot of work. There's a lot of mistakes. Let me give you an example that to me is really illustrative. So we as a country became divided and had a civil war over slavery, whether it continues or whether it ends. And then most fundamental rights of freedom. And so the Civil War ends in 1865. The 13th Amendment is passed to the U.S. Constitution to end slavery. 1866, the next year, for those who aren't good at math, that's how it goes. 1865 followed by 1866. They passed the Civil Rights Act cleverly named the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And in it said that all of the recently freed slaves, and I'm paraphrasing, would have the same rights as white men, that women weren't included in that. Okay? That was statutory. And then they thought, you know what? That's only statutory. And we need to reinforce that by passing another amendment after the 13th Amendment to ensure that we're talking about the Civil Rights Act of 1866, this idea of equality for all men, to be equal to white men, should be made not just a statute, but it should be also in the Constitution. So what follows the 13th Amendment? Boom, this is like a genius class, right? 14th Amendment, guaranteeing equal protection under the law. Now, did that take care of it? No, it didn't. And so about 18, 20 years later, the then U.S. Supreme Court absolutely guts what had been put in place and said, you know what, that will only apply to a tiny piece of jobs out there. Otherwise, it really isn't applicable. And so it wasn't until 1964 that a Civil Rights Act was passed to end separate but equal, right? To end all those things. If you look at the raw statute, those constitutional amendments, should have been resolved in 1865 at the latest in 1866. But it was 1964. Now, I had to work on Capitol Hill in the U.S. Senate, and I was to be there in 1991 for the follow-up piece of civil rights legislation to put into effect what was written in 1866. It's a pretty long road. And so when we think about how does our government work, is it important that we know how the three branches work and what powers and rights and responsibilities they have? It's critical. And then we look into us, regardless of our major, to understand that. And only 16%, and then all three branches of the government, now we've got some work to do. It doesn't just happen, it happens if we do something about it. Now, so, and by the way, where in the, what part of the Constitution includes and talks about the separation of powers? So trick question. What's more awkward than that? I should ask somebody just to shame somebody. Nowhere in the Constitution to talk about separation of powers, and that's important because that means that while there are rights enumerated for each branch of the government, that branch has to enforce them. Right? That branch has to say, but they can overstep it. And if you look at American history, you can make a whole course out of that. But you can go to American history and you can say, here's where each of the branches engaged in overreach, or equally perilous, didn't enforce their rights and obligations under the Constitution. And when it gets out of balance, right, because it was set up in an ingenious way, but it's predicated, it's based upon each of those branches flexing, all right? So, and if each, right, if the judiciary, right, if the legislature, if the executive branch, if each of them aren't doing their job and creating some friction about it, then the other branch or branches will dominate. Now, why is that bad? Right? Well, let's then answer that by taking a step back and asking the question, how are democracies being challenged today? And there are experts way better than me on this, but I read a great book I really loved a few years ago called How Democracies Die. And it talks about what's happening across the globe around democracies. And the number of democracies that are withering right now are greater by material amount than those democracies that are growing. And we were in Afghanistan for 20 years working on building a democracy. 20 years of building a democracy. How long did that last? Yeah, a few hours. So democracies, you can't just stand them up. You can't just put in a leader. You can't just put in place a constitution. Like they don't, that's not how they breathe. That's not how they live. And you have to know how they live, and you have to know how they die. Because you can't keep it alive if you don't know how folks want to kill it. All right, so we look across the globe and look at this question of how do you take a democracy out? There was something said that's applicable now that was said, it's attributed to Mussolini, right? About the time of World War II, and the question was, how do you take over an entire country as an autocrat? And again, I'm paraphrasing, but it was along the lines of it's like plucking a chicken. You take out one feather at a time and really nobody notices. And so the playbook is not, it's not rolling tanks necessarily. It's take this idea of a democracy and destroy it from within. How do you do that? How do you destroy democracy? The answer is pretty easy, right? It's way easier to kill something than to build something, to destroy something than it is to build it. And destroying it is pretty easy. All you have to do is play upon that most basic of human emotion, which is fear. Right? We're all scared of something. Every single one of them is scared of something. And if you want to get at a democracy, what you do is you find out what scares people and you make them think you're the source of safety, the source of security. It's that simple. So what do people fear? Right? People fear that they're not going to have enough money, that they're going to lose status. Right? They fear that somebody's going to, especially as you get older, somebody's going to attack you. Somebody's going to take your stuff. You're not safe. Right? They're going to threaten your economic opportunity. And they look to individuals right? Through demagoguery. And say, you know what? I can save you from that. I know what you're scared of. I know what you're scared of. And I can save you from that. And then here's the real trick to this. You then make people hate people that aren't like them. And that isn't hard to do. Right? What you do is you try and get people to think that there are those out there that are not like them, that want to take from them. And you use that fear and turn it into hate. That's it. Both sides of the aisle agreed. We saw this 2 presidential elections ago. Troll farms out there taking those things that make us different, our diversity, and using it not to make us better, but to make us hate each other. And part of that is really effective. So don't raise your hand, but just think about your own political philosophy. Okay? How do you identify politically? Do you ever catch yourself saying that you have no idea how the other political party could think what they think? Do you ever say, you know what? It can't be understood. It's not worthy of thought. They're simply dead wrong. Everything's driving us to want to say that, right? Social media is the ultimate amplifier for demagogues, right? It's like micro-targeting the ability to compound and reinforce a demagogue's messaging. But all of us are guilty of thinking, I don't know what the other political party could be thinking, and all of a sudden, you think of them, you discount them to zero. Now, the second we discount somebody else to zero, what have we done? Right? I mean, we've created utter division. We've made them less than human, certainly less than us. Now, I'm not saying you got to agree with them, but one of the things I taught in law school for 9 years is if you're going to be an advocate, really good advocates know the case of the one they're opposing, contrary view, better than their opponent knows. You can't just say, I have no idea what they're thinking, they're dead wrong. I'm just going to wing it, right? You'll never prevail. And so you've got to look at it from their intellectual perspective. How are they? What's their rational thought that attaches to it? And then you've got to look at it from their emotional perspective. What's driving their thoughts? Right? What's behind it? Not that you should agree with it. It may reinforce your own belief in your views being the ones that you want to keep. But you can't dehumanize them. Right? They're people, they're citizens, they have thoughts and feelings behind this. Because the playbook for killing a democracy is for you to reject them. Right? So that's how this thing works. And that's why this class, to me, is so important. Because you have to know how our democracy works, why it works, what are the challenges been historically to our democracy in state and federal government, what are the threats to it, and then what are our opportunities to make this thing flourish more than ever. Yeah.
So how do we deal with, when the opposing goes against democracy or?
Yeah. How do we go, what do we do when the opposing view goes against democracy or civic engagement? I think I nailed that. Yeah. Yeah, so I think, it's more speech, right? It's engaging in a constructive conversation, right? Challenging in debate. It's through the education that we have, right, to call it out and to do it respectfully and to say, look, I hear what you're saying. I believe that we've seen this before, right? And then you walk them through, I took federal government, right? I actually listened to this goofy guest speaker for a few minutes and then heard from the actual source. But it's through more speech and not rejection, right? Like I hear what you're saying to somebody, right? I believe in X. I hear you. I believe in Y. Let's talk about why I believe in Y and you believe in X. and open that up. But it can't just be, you don't exist, you don't carry any value, and I can't understand you. You know, a lot of folks I disagree with. To me, I want to know how they got where they got in their thinking, you know? Like, help me understand that, right? Like, let's, you know, your belief is this, and I think it's anti-democracy. Let me tell you why I think that. And then you tell me, help me understand you. Because there's something behind it. I believe people are really good. I do. But I think we all have fears, and we all have concerns, and we have different levels of education that give us different benefits, but then I think different obligations. Like, I don't think I have I think I'm obligated to engage in the conversation. Like, I don't think I get to hear somebody say something, and then just walk away from it and discount it to zero. I think I have an obligation to sit down and try and have a real conversation about it. It's not easy. There are times I find myself where I'm like, man, that's ridiculous. I mean, and I just want to just say, no, I'm not, no. Like, nobody can think that. That's ignorant, which it can be, right? Well, why is a lot of my stuff, I think, not ignorant? Because I've been in an education that's come with that, and I went to law school. But they're feeling it for a reason, and they're a human, so let's talk about it. I just think it's not comfortable, and we haven't been given good tools or role models to do it. Right? What do we see when we turn on any one of the broadcast channels? Right? I mean, it's constant rejection or mockery. I love going between the major, I know I'm not but I love going between media outlets. And like, you know what sells, and they know what sells. Right? It is not a constructive conversation about the importance of propagating our democracy through civil discourse, right? It's let me mock the other side. Both sides do it, right? You pull up either one, pick the major two outlets in the U.S. right now. Pick Fox and pick CNN, right? I'll guarantee you, on their front page, there's going to be something that says, can you believe what this person said? Outrage, anger, vitriol, reinforcing the only view is one view, reinforcing orthodoxy of thought, right? Like, we don't get to do that. And then once we know the systems of government, we can then talk about how do we make our democracy healthy? How do we make it continue well beyond the next 25 years and hopefully 50, 100, and forever? How do we do that? And part of it is you've got to know the rules. It's fascinating. I mean, I'm now in my time, but I've got a couple more minutes. But to me, one of the questions from the last group was this idea of, well, look, everything feels more extreme. That it's the extremes in both parties that are prevailing. And my argument is we got to be smarter than that. So yes, there are some structural issues to deal with. We know about gerrymandering, we know about domination of state houses, the decennial census to then restructure voting districts. But if we really think about it, there are other ways to approach it once you know the levers of government. And let me give you an example, right? And there are macro forces out there to understand and manage. We were talking earlier about rural versus urban. Interesting thing in Oklahoma. The legislature was opposed to a wooden increase in Medicaid, even though it was 90% dollars from the federal government, 10% from the state. And it couldn't pass either chamber. And but then it went to a vote of the people of Oklahoma. And there are 77 counties in Oklahoma. 70 of those 77 voted against it. Voted against expanding. 7 voted for it, and it passed. Right? It was a really graphic illustration of urban versus rural in a statewide election. Kansas just demonstrated that post-ops. So I think this class is critically important. I think it's worthy of hopefully the credit hours that you're investing in. And you've got a remarkable professor gotta let somebody else win some time, all these awards, she's backing up. Maybe one or two quick questions, and then I'll roll. All right, I'll do two quick questions, then I'll leave you all alone. Right here.
So I was wondering if the population is still uninformed, why do we still think that democracy is the best option? And why does the US take the responsibility of forcing democracy upon other countries if the country is not ready for democracy?
Yeah, that's not a quick answer. It's a really big question, and it's one that there has to be a conversation about is, do you believe democracy is the best form of government? Now, I personally do, and I love the statement about, democracy is horrible except compared to all the rest. I know that's overgeneralizing, but I do think it's a fair question to ask, do you prefer democracy or do you prefer something else? And if so, why? And, we saw this in Afghanistan. I have to go back to the illustration. 20 years, and it didn't last 2 days after the cold out. And so I guess the question can be both, which form of government or what form of government do you choose and why? What are the up and downsides to them? And then how do you propagate that, if you believe you should, in a way that's stable, that has, that isn't so fragile it's gone 2 days after the U.S. leaves. That's clearly a failure. And so you can't just say it's going to be imposed. It has to deal with the reality of the environment that you're in.
And it's important to remember in Afghanistan, women don't have the right to go to college now. So de-educating the populace.
Yeah.
Question here, quick question.
So with all that in mind, what is the responsibility we as citizens have?
Yeah. Great question. That's like a perfect, it's time to leave Joe question. Right? It's like a softball. We're good to have you here. Maybe it's time for you to go. So on behalf of the class, thank you. The role is we've got to be engaged at a real level. And I'm not saying everybody needs to run for Congress, or everyone needs to be a Supreme Court justice. But I think we all have to realize that we have a lot that others don't have. And that means as a citizen, we have to be involved to a level of moderate discomfort, right? Not so, you've got to take time and you've got to give it wherever you can. I think one of my favorite summaries of the meaning of life is to love, and if you can, make a difference. And to me, part of what we've been given is the ability to make a difference. And to me, fundamental to that is how do we keep our form of government moving forward in a constructive way. And that means, for me, I've got to vote, right? That means for me, I've got to be involved in an active way in the civil discourse of my community, right? And for me, it means I've got to be involved in my chosen profession of education and civic education around that. And so for me, I know what that means. I think everyone's got to ask themselves, where can you contribute and what's your role? I've got friends who drive me crazy. He sits around and watches the city government in Norman every, I guess, like Tuesday evening, and then just watches it on his television and then just complains. And I was like, dude, I can't take it anymore, right? Like, you've got a job, you're in a good, run for office, right? Don't just complain. And I think every time we say to ourselves, we've got to complain, we've got to ask, am I in a position to do something about it? And if so, what am I really doing? Yes, I think it's collective in our obligation, personal, and I answer that question. All right, I think one more time, I should have. Thank you very much.
Hey, guys, so you're properly inspired now, say yes?
Yeah.
All right, good. We're gonna talk really briefly about the fact that you have a couple of the assignments coming up. And then I'm going to talk to you about registering to vote. And we're also going to take roll. All those sound good? Yeah. Okay. So let me get the roll going, and I want to talk to you about, let me get the roll going first. Will be. Okay, I'm taking attendance now. It says it is active. Okay, you guys. So I'm taking attendance. Now let's talk about some things that you have to do. You ready? All right. Number one, on Friday, you have labs. That's in 2 days. You have a workbook due, chapter 4. Okay. You also have a thesis statement due. And here's the great thing about the thesis statement. It's extra credit. It's free points, right? A thesis statement, basically, you make an 83 on your paper and you turn in a thesis statement that was frankly something you threw up in 3 seconds because you remembered at 11:43 that you needed to do it, and suddenly you have an 88. See, logic, right? That's right. So sometimes you should listen to Eric and other times you shouldn't. But make sure it's done by Friday. Yeah. Well, hold on just a second, okay? I'm going to help you with that. So that's what I'm talking about. Let me escape out of here and go over here, go over here, go over here. All right. All right. If we look at assignments, right? Under assignments, you guys have things like introductory. This is the other class, but it looks the same for you guys. This is engaged, you know how to get there. The thesis, right? If you go here, it's just an upload. There's not much there, okay? And so I get emails about this, so I'm gonna say what I say in the emails, which is go to the actual assignment. It will help you. So let's look at the assignment. You have 3 possible books that you can read, right? And you're writing a civil rights paper with the focus of this book. You're using this book as a focus, okay? So the first option, Killers of the Flower Moon, this is something that happened in Oklahoma to the Osage people, all right? And you have 2 questions. The first question is the relationship between the United States government and Native Americans contribute to your understanding of the country's political view and treatment of Native Americans. That sounds like a structure question to me, right? So if you're thinking, hey, as I read this, I want to pay attention to the interplay between the U.S. government and Native American tribes, so I want to write about the structure. That's the prompt to choose. So when you write a thesis, you might even say something like, you know, Graham indicates that the relationship between the federal government and Indian tribes has been a convoluted history, right? That's not a great final thesis, right? But it's a 5-point thesis, okay? And it's meant you're thinking about it, all right? The second, are there recent examples of racial prejudice and injustice that parallel those described in Killers of the Flower Moon? So your thesis statement, you're talking about parallels to the current times or recent times, okay? And you can use those and say, yeah, you know, there are parallels between the racial violence that you see in Killers of the Flower Moon and present. For example, anyone? Any example anybody wants to give me? There aren't any? No examples? I think there's some examples, right? You got one? George Floyd, what? Missing and killed Indigenous women. George Floyd. You know, you can go lots of different ways, right? Examples. Okay? If you choose the book Cast, write an answer that answers one of the following thoughts. What is caste and how does it affect the 3 societies described in the book? What are some factors that Wilkerson describes as the causes for the creation of a caste system? Does the system still exist in the United States? Again, that sounds like what kind of question? Structure question. If you want to read this book and write a structural analysis, write a thesis that kind of parallels that. Isabel Wilkerson shows the untouchables are often the group that experiences the most violence in society. What are some of those examples? One is specific to Oklahoma, right? And do acts of violence against certain groups of population still exist? That sounds like not a structural question. It sounds like what? A what? A parallel question, similar to this, and we're talking about, again, racial violence, right? If you choose the book down, girl, write an essay that answers one of the following. What's misogyny and how does it affect societies described in the book? What are some factors that man describes as the causes for the perpetuation of the system? Sounds like a structure question, right? And then the second one, man proposes that sexism and misogyny are distinct. Explain the difference between the two. In what ways is misogyny like a police force that punishes women who deviate from their assigned role and rewards women who stay in their lane? Right? So in this, we're talking about, again, parallels, right? A parallel question. Can you use those examples? And there are examples that she gives from Oklahoma, right? So when we talk about any of these three books, and you can choose whichever one you want to write. And you might think, hey, I want to write a structured answer to this book that I'm reading. Then write a structured thesis. If you think, I want to write about violence, or I want to write about injustice, then choose the second. Okay? And here's an important thing too. Let's suppose you write a thesis, and then you finish reading the book and you say, no, I want to talk about this. Cool. I don't care. That's cool. Write your best paper. Okay? So let's talk about what the paper is supposed to look like. You must have 5 total sources. Of those, 3 must be academic or government sources. Okay? Can anybody give me an example of a government source? A document produced by the government. Yes. The census is a great government source. Okay? The Bureau of Land Management produces documents. You can use those. Another economic stats, from the Fed. Those are nice. Yeah. Almost anything with .gov after it. Yes. Okay. Now, if you have a statement from a member of Congress that's clearly a political statement, not a government document, right? It's not produced by a government agency, right? But, okay. Academic sources we're going to get to in just a second. But here's the great thing. The book you're reading gets to be one of them. Okay? So that means you really only have to find 2 other sources that are academic and or government, right? That's all you have to do. Answer one of the above prompts in 700 to 1,000 word essay. How many pages is that? It's 2 to 3 to 4 right in there. You're exactly right. Okay? And so it's not very long. You can probably write it right now. Have you already started it? You're in the thinking process. Right, I get that. The creative beginning process. By Friday, which is 2 days away, you're gonna have filler pieces you're gonna stick in there, and boom, the paper's gonna write itself. Yes? 1 hour. Maybe 6. But all right, with rewrites and stuff like that, because we have something at the University of Oklahoma called the Writing Center. And so if you have some problems with writing, you can always go there. Do not include the question as part of your word count. Cite internally and include a word cited. If you say, in the book, they say this, then put a page number, right? And then put a word cited at the end. Yeah. No, I do not. Great question. Not a specific version of citation. As long as it's consistent, I'll take it. Yeah.
What do you use grammar?
Grammarly will also help you. As is will your word processing. It says 12.5, 1 inch margins, cut through. Hold up. I have one more thing. This is libraries at the University of Oklahoma. You can search for something. I searched for racism in America. It was given to me last time. I got a whole bunch of sources under articles. I clicked and I got this, and then I stuck a filter over here. I just clicked, all right, over here on this side. I clicked the filter. Oh, why don't we go down? Okay, I clicked the filter where it says peer review okay? And it's hidden now because I've already put the filter. It says peer reviewed, that means it's academic in nature, until,
Monday.
next time. Over.
Have a nice day and a good weekend. Isn't it like Good job.